Hello guys, this is Modest Major here, bringing you some commentary over some Halo Master Chief Collection gameplay. Bringing you two gameplays, one from Halo 3, one from Halo 2 Classic. They're both fairly average gameplays, they're fairly close, we managed to clutch them out. So I hope you guys enjoy watching that in the background, but I'm just using them as stock footage essentially, because today I wanted to talk about Star Wars Battlefront 3. It's something I've held back from giving my opinions on just quite yet on YouTube, but it's still a game I'm actually pretty darn excited for, and will probably be picking it up. But I also have my fair share of concerns and worries about it. I think it's, more intelligent as a consumer right now to ask more questions and be a little bit more critical, considering the sheer amount of disappointments that have been suffered in the gaming industry on several levels. Disappointments like Battlefield 4 being released broken, Master Chief Collection being released broken. Now, whilst I don't think Star Wars Battlefront 3 is going to fall into that category of disappointment, I still, have my reservations as to whether or not it will be exactly what I'm looking for from a Star Wars game, because I hold Star Wars games to a very high standard. It's funny, because you would expect the Star Wars license to have so much shovelware and so many throwaway titles, and whilst there are a few of them here and there, stuff like Star Wars Connect, which was an absolute disgrace to society, and you had to dance as Han Solo to the tune of I'm Han Solo, Solo, which is probably one of the most cringeworthy things I've ever seen in gaming. On the other hand, you get games like Star Wars Episode 1 Pod Racing, Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2, Star Wars Jedi Outcast, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. There were just an absolute ton of good games, and there was a time where picking up a Star Wars game was never a risk. I didn't even think twice about it, because chances were I was going to get an amazing game. And I think that comes down to the fact that Star Wars is just such a beloved franchise, and the lore is so greatly appreciated, and the mythos by so many, that I feel like if you're a game developer and you're given the task of producing a Star Wars game, then chances are they're probably going to put a fair amount of creativity and resolve into it. It's just rare that a bad Star Wars game comes out, even if it is a little bit rough around the edges and a little bit janky here and there. They still manage to try and do a great job of capturing the essence, because I think everyone understands the essence of Star Wars and what makes Star Wars so great in a lot of ways to so many people. Now, my reservations come down to about 3 issues so far. If you guys haven't seen the trailer, I'm sure you all have by now if you're Star Wars fans, and if you clicked on this video, there's a very high probability you did. But the trailer was very light in details. It gave us next to nothing, and it was pretty much a gigantic banner saying, wait for E3 if you want to see the serious stuff. Whilst it did say in-engine footage at the bottom middle, it's very hard to take that statement seriously, as it looked essentially like CGI. Maybe on the PC you could kind of get close to those sort of settings if you pumped up your settings all the way to the maximum. But even then, I'd say that, those sort of graphics aren't your regular, everyday sort of graphics, and that's nothing like it's going to look on console, that's for sure. But nonetheless, it tried to give us a flavour of what we can expect in Star Wars Battlefront 3 to some extent, and it seems as though there's going to be quite a great emphasis on the land combat battles. I'm pretty sure I've heard in interviews that there's going to be no sort of space combat, which is a little bit frustrating, because Star Wars Battlefront was pretty darn innovative for its time in a lot of ways. One of the things was it tried, at the very least. It was a very basic form, and it could have been a lot more than it was. But still, for its time, it managed to create some sort of space combat simulator where it was separate to the ground combat. They weren't seamless with one another, and you couldn't interchange between the two. But you could still land in these hangar bays and attack their hangar bays and attack objective points. And it managed to cover a lot of bases in Star Wars Battlefront. Star Wars Battlefront 2 might not have advanced too much on the core gunplay, but it definitely innovated in terms of adding Jedis, adding space combat, adding a huge amount of Jedis and just overall increasing the content pool, and that was something I was very excited about. And something I worry about in Star Wars Battlefront 3 is that it's going to be another case of a game which has such high production values, the emphasis on having such a beautiful looking engine and graphics and tight gunplay is going to detract from the level of content we saw. You know, Star Wars Battlefront 2's whole mission statement, in my opinion, was bigger is better. Let's take what we had in Star Wars Battlefront 1 and let's times that by 5. They might not have necessarily innovated in a gigantic amount of ways, aside from the space combat. But even the space combat, you could argue, was just, you know, expanding the gameplay options that were there. And it was something that people were asking for quite a bit. So it seems a little bit of a shame to actually go back on that. Nonetheless, from a personal, selfish perspective, the ground combat is actually what I'm most interested in. I think it's going to be a long time before gaming can kind of deliver the sort of seamless transitioning space to combat battles that people are really looking for. And I'd rather not waste resources from a development point of view, you know, creating perhaps an inferior to what's actually in our head, you know, an inferior vision of space combat. If they can't go that extra mile, maybe it's not worth having in the game. I kind of understand that. Nonetheless, the gun combat is actually one of the things I'm most skeptical about. I'm actually not the biggest DICE fan, and this is entirely personal preference, but I feel like it's a personal preference at least worth exploring, and I can't help but feel others and fans of the Battlefront franchise may feel similarly to me, because I feel like Pandemic and DICE are two completely different studios. Pandemic, who made the original Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2, they tried to create a kind of arcadey feel, I feel like, to the gunplay and to the overall combat. There was something a little bit whimsical and a little bit silly about it, and it added to the amount that you could play the game and just have fun with the game and chill with the game. Which leads me to my next point of there's going to be no instant action option in Star Wars Battlefront 3, which I think is a shame, because it was just one of these games that you'd pick up and you'd play kind of mindlessly for just hours on end, and it seemed to never get boring. It was just this infinite pool of enjoyment, a great selection of maps, and they just did a fantastic job of capturing the essence of Star Wars. And I feel like in a lot of ways, DICE are 100% capable of that. They create just awe-inspiring engines. Like I said, I feel like developers step up to the plate when they're given the Star Wars license, and I feel like they've been putting ludicrous amounts of time and effort into Star Wars Battlefront 3. I actually think that's the reason why Battlefield 4 came out broken, and they took a little bit of time sweeping things up and making sure it was clean, because they probably diverted so many resources into Star Wars Battlefront 3, and I'm pretty sure they've been working it for a hefty amount of time. And I do think Star Wars Battlefront 3 is going to release with like some of the highest production values, and I do believe they can capture the theme. They can put everything in the right place. My worry is with DICE is I'm not 100% sure if they're a game that can capture the heart and soul of Star Wars, as much as they can make everything look distinct, you know, everything look identical to the Star Wars universe and backdrops. I do worry that they might not be the company I would choose hands down to actually create the atmosphere and create the heart and soul that Star Wars inspires. And it's something that you can't necessarily put into words, but you know when you see a 5-second clip from Star Wars, you know the amount of amazing shots, the music, and luckily they do have access to all the assets, so there's nothing stopping them. But just from the perspective of, you know, when I used to play Battlefield 3 campaign, Bad Company campaign, Bad Company 2 campaign, I never think they've been the best job at creating compelling stories and getting you invested in the characters. I've never thought that was their strongest point. I think their strongest point is creating a engine that works phenomenally well, creating large-scale warfare like pretty much no other company can, and a sandboxy shooting environment, which is all good and well, of course. But I do worry that, like, Pandemic strengths might not be matched by DICE in some aspects. I do worry that they won't capture the comical and the kind of not taking itself too seriously attitude. And this kind of bleeds into the whole gunplay aspect as well. You know, I want these to feel like kind of silly plasma shooters. I don't know quite how to describe it, but I do worry that they'll just put a Star Wars skin and, you know, change Battlefield bullets into plasma bullets, into electric bullets, and that's just something I'm not 100% inspired by. You know, I really want them to be their own thing. I want it to be its own game. That's definitely one of the biggest worries I've had, because I'm not a Battlefield fan, I am a Star Wars Battlefront fan to the extreme, and I think it's kind of unfair that people just kind of expect everyone to like roll with the punches and get a Battlefield game in space. In fact, a lot of people on the internet are 100% happy, but I don't think that's necessarily 100% fair. I think they have to do the Star Wars Battlefront fans justice and bring a product that's in line and similar and has some of the strengths that the original Star Wars Battlefront games did. Now, in terms of the Jedi combat, in my opinion, I didn't actually think that Star Wars Battlefront 2 was hands down a better game than Star Wars Battlefront 1. I think Star Wars Battlefront 1 chose fantastic locations. The combat just felt really robust and interesting, and there was just the right amount of diversity in the weapon classes, and the species of, you know, like, you know, you had your guns even fighting, which I thought was hilarious. Not necessarily playing as the guns, but beating them up was pretty goddamn amazing. And you had your battle droids, and they just they had a nice mixture of places to fight and races to fight as. And Star Wars Battlefront 2, for me, the only thing that really made it a better sequel or a worthy successor was the inclusion of Jedis. Jedis was something I was extremely excited about. I could play as a Jedi for hours on end, and it just didn't seem to get boring. The concept of running around, beating up droids, even though the combat system was incredibly simplistic and there weren't that many options, compared to a game like Star Wars Jedi Power Battles or Star Wars Jedi Outcast. If you're aware of these games, they actually had a multiplayer option where you could choose between all these different force powers and you could equip several at a time. There was a lot more depth to that sort of combat, whereas Star Wars Battlefront was a little bit of a hack and slash. You kind of just spammed X repeatedly and hoped for the best. And I feel like they could add in a system in which the Jedis were a little bit more complex. Not too complex, but I was actually thinking of a system similar to League of Legends, where you've got your hero, he starts off at a base level, and as he levels up during the battle, he unlocks a couple of skills. For example, Darth Vader would have a selection of Force Choke, Force Throw Your Lightsaber, and Force Lightning or something like that. And then he'd have an ultimate where he just kind of went crazy and went into Ultra Sith mode or something like that. And I feel like that would make it interesting. It would have a sense of progression. You wouldn't just be mindlessly beating up people, because it did seem like they were kind of overpowered, and I feel like they could have some sort of a balance to it where the Jedis kind of had to be fairly passive at the beginning of an engagement because they were kind of softer, but as they leveled up their skills during the engagement, they got more and more powerful, and you had to treat them with more and more respect. Because, you know, in Star Wars Battlefront 2, the system they had was you had a system where the more you killed people, the more your health would actually start to regenerate. So you got punished for playing passive, which I didn't mind, but it was also very easy to play aggressive. It wasn't particularly challenging. Unless everyone agreed to gang up on the Jedi, chances are that Jedi could survive for a kind of crazy amount of time with very little punishment whatsoever, because they just completely annihilated the units. So that is a system I would 100% be interested in seeing. And I was thinking the way in which the selection process for the Jedis could work is a score per minute system. Rather than achieving 10 kills, I think was what it was in Star Wars Battlefront 2, the first person to achieve 10 kills gets it. I feel like if they could track the score per minutes of the players so that getting the objective will count towards it, getting kills, getting assists, getting heals, that would all, you know, add to the skill pool, and whoever had the highest score per minute in a match would get access to one of the Jedi, so it would encourage people to play aggressive, and then they'd get that level up system once they play. That's just my personal opinions on the subject. I think Jedis could be a make or break for Star Wars, especially if they're not concentrating on the space combat. I think that could be something that separates itself from Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2 by making that Jedi combat complex, especially as I don't think they're going to have as many Jedis as Star Wars Battlefront 2 did, which I think is a bit of a disappointment. So they definitely need to have more depth in that field. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this commentary to some extent. A little bit rambly, I know, but it's Star Wars and that's just how I get. I hope you guys enjoyed the commentary. I've been Modest Major. Peace out.